D.C. And it is my pleasure to welcome you this morning on behalf of the Arab Center, Washington, D.C., and the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. After more than 2 years of a presidential vacuum, Joseph Aoun was elected as the 14th president of Lebanon, and Nawaf Salam was appointed as prime minister. This marks a pivotal moment that may signal the formation of Lebanon's Third Republic. However, the country faces deep-seated challenges, including political instability, economic collapse, and weakened state institutions debilitated by endemic corruption. Despite this, Lebanon now has a unique opportunity to restore its sovereignty, rebuild institutions, and improve relations with key regional allies that could play a crucial role in economic recovery. We are delighted today to be partnering with Marissa Kurma and her team at the Wilson Center to host this panel of experts to examine this important topic at such a critical time for Lebanon and its people. I will now turn it over to Marissa to introduce the panel and share the discussion. Marissa, microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Ahmad, and thank you again to the Arab Center for this important discussion and for this collaboration. Our panelists are known to all of you, particularly those that follow Lebanon very closely. I'll start with Ambassador David Hale, who of course served as the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon and Jordan, amongst other countries, and is currently a global fellow at the Wilson Center. Joseph Bahout, who is the director of the Issam Fares Institute at the American University of Beirut, and Patricia Karam, who is vice president for outreach and communications at the ATFL, the American Task Force on Lebanon, here in Washington. We will be joined shortly with Ali Mbayed, who is a renowned economist on Lebanon and will be hopefully commenting on some of the key economic issues. So thank you all for joining. Joseph, I'm going to start with you. I think my kickoff question to all of you is going to be similar, but particularly given the latest developments and the picture that Ahmad just framed for us with a new president, a new prime minister, and a new government, and as of today, also a new governor of the central bank. There's a lot happening on the domestic front, which is also very much related and connected to regional dynamics. So what is your assessment of the regional dynamics as they pertain to Lebanon, and how is it being mirrored on the domestic political front?
First of all, thank you very much, Marissa and the Wilson Center. Thank you, Ahmad, and the Arab Center. I'm very happy to be here with you. Look, it makes, I mean, no one has any doubt that what happened during the last year and a half, starting with October 7 and the war in Gaza, and then the war on Lebanon that heated up in August, September of last year, has radically changed the landscape, not only of Lebanon and Syria, but also of the entire region. And I think that more is to come. Of course, these, what we can call without value judgment, the defeat or the erosion of Hezbollah during that war, the weakening of what we call the axis of resistance, that took a fatal blow with the fall of the Assad regime in Syria soon after the ceasefire in Lebanon. All this has created a completely new equation. And I think that it's not an exaggeration to say that we have entered a new world in this region, at least for a while now. What is this new world? What are these contours is another question. Don't think we're here to comment it. So this has opened up a lot of things in Lebanon. It has unraveled a lot of obstacles that prevented the institutional, let's say, normal life in Lebanon. This has led to the quick election of Joseph Aoun as president of the Republic and the unexpected nomination of Nawaf Salam. So I'm really putting here a small difference between something that was much expected, the election of Joseph Aoun, and the surprise that was the nomination of Nawaf Salam. And with what is supposed, now I don't know if what happened today in Lebanon, we'll discuss it, is toning this down, but what is supposed now to open or to usher to a new era of possible structural reform in the country, a new era probably where political life will be quote unquote healthier, with an armed group, Hezbollah, a non-state actor that has dictated almost everything on Lebanon's public life for the last 20 years, today very much weakened. So there is an opening, there is a huge avenue for a lot of changes in the country. However, two caveats, and I'll stop there. The country is still the country, meaning that Lebanese are still Lebanese, the politicians are still the politicians. What we have seen today shows that the bickering is still there. So the reformist project will be difficult to lift and to handle and to sustain. And I think that this is the main challenge now of this government. And the second caveat is that these same factors, the regional factors that have caused this enormous upheaval, this enormous, let's say, change in the country and in Syria and etc., are still ongoing. The waves have not settled yet. These waves are probably called to continue, be it in Gaza, be it in the West Bank. The Syrian situation is very worrying. It's far from being stable. It's more unstable than even 2-3 weeks ago. And then you have the big unknown of what will happen with Iran. And so changes are still to come. So what triggered the change in Lebanon is not yet ending. It's still an open process. And I think that we have still to wait for episode 2 of season 1 to know what the film will be and where we're gonna reach. But definitely we are at the beginning of a new page in Lebanon, and this page has to be written carefully. It won't be easy, but an opportunity is there, and I hope that we will not miss it once again.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And Patricia, I'm going to turn to you to sort of expand a little bit more, given what Joseph has described as an opportunity, but also the beginning of the road. What is your sense of how things are unraveling domestically, given the regional or geopolitical landscape that, as Joseph mentioned, is still very much in flux? It's still very, it's still changing. And what is your sense of the pulse of the Lebanese people? I mean, there was a moment of hope with the election of Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Salam, but there's a lot more to do. So where are people at as these new pathways are introduced by the new dynamics?
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'll touch a little bit in my response on what some of the things that Joe has already mentioned, and also what Imad pointed to initially in his introduction. And of course, we have a new government in charge in Lebanon. And this is really, as everybody has underscored so far, the country has really a chance to sort of put its house in order. So there is a certain optimism, especially that, after 2 years of paralysis, you have the quick but nonetheless election of a president, and then a nomination of a prime minister, both signaling sort of their readiness to tackle some of the deep-seated challenges that Imad mentioned, including corruption, governance, socioeconomic problems. So there is a lot of there is the promise of a new sort of Lebanon and strong messages about political change, rebuilding the state and institutions, the rule of law, etc. And it is interesting that both Joseph Aoun and Nawaf Salam are somehow complementary figures. They marry sort of a military experience with experience as a jurist, Salam's career as a jurist, somewhat untainted by local politics and corruption. I start on this optimistic note, but when you think about what recovering or rescuing Lebanon will require, there are numerous challenges ahead. There is, of course, for example, starting the ceasefire. We have this November ceasefire that was reached between Israel and Hezbollah that ended the conflict between the two 13-point truce that called on the left to deploy to the south and on the IDF to withdraw within 60 days. Now, the truce still holds, even though it's past its deadline and Israel remains in 5 strategic outposts. So, and at the same time, though the ceasefire seemed initially to be going somewhat well, the recent tit-for-tat attacks signal otherwise. There is the issue of Hezbollah. We know that the conflict has decimated the military group's command and control structure, caused disarray among rank and file, and destroyed a lot of its weapons arsenal. So at the same time, though it may be a shadow of its former self, it still cannot be underestimated. And it still has representation in parliament, plus, according to some 15,000 fighters that remain. And of course, you have the challenges that relate to governance and the economy, the fact that the economy has been collapsed since 2019, really as a result of, again, echoing what others have said, mismanagement, unsustainable fiscal and monetary policies, etc. Now, taking all this into account, I think success will rest on a number of questions and factors. And I think, we can talk in more details about them, but there is the issue, for example, of reconstruction. The Israel-Hezbollah war has really had a devastating social and economic impact. The World Bank estimated 8.5 million in damages and losses, but the reality is much more than that. The damage has disproportionately impacted Shia populations in the south and the Bekaa in the southern suburbs of Beirut, where the Israeli attacks were concentrated. So there's still a remaining sense of collective punishment. And the added dynamic of some of their community. There are others, on the other hand, that believe that this could base. So social implosion is still of some concern. But Lebanon's sort of reconstruction or redevelopment is really kind of critical to restoring trust and stability. So how will the question that comes up, and I'm sure others will talk about it, how will Lebanon finance it, and how fast can Lebanon do it? Reconstruction means restoring services, rebuilding infrastructure, and sort of supporting crisis-affected communities. This will also fill the gap left by Hezbollah and prevent potentially its resurgence, projecting an amount of state and control, assuming the state can do it. Strength and control, I meant, assuming the state can do it. But Lebanon's state is broke at the same time, so it can afford none of it. And its governance, as we already mentioned, needs reforming. So to fix how it's run, Lebanon needs money. To attract money, it needs to fix how it's run. And so at the same time, without the banking reforms and without the financial and banking reform, it's unlikely to expect foreign assistance. And so far, the country has not really been able to kind of enact some of these reforms that will unlock the aid. So the question is, will the government be able, and I'm sure Alia is better placed to tackle some of this, but will the government be able to undertake the political reforms, the restructuring agenda, the structural and institutional reforms that Joe mentioned, and even allow for a revised IMF program, potentially even the refinancing or re-engagement of the GCC country, that would stabilize really the economy and sort of chart a path towards recovery. All of this, even if it were feasible to do, will take time, and action is needed immediately, especially that you still have a large amount of people who remain displaced and you still have widespread destruction. So, and finally, there's the issue of the issue of security and sovereignty, if you will, which is also linked to a certain extent to this issue of international assistance, which may to a certain extent, not just depend on financial overhaul. Under the terms of the truce, the ceasefire, Hezbollah must disarm, and the US and the Gulf countries consider this to a certain extent a prerequisite for large-scale assistance. So will the government be able to complete what it has started and achieve a full disbanding and demobilization of Hezbollah, ensuring control of arms through the LAF? And in this regard, can the LAF be expected to be strengthened and its offensive and defensive capabilities improved so that it's able to complete the task of dismantling and confiscating the weapons of Hezbollah and secure the borders and restore security? So again, this is costly and ambitious and greatly dependent on foreign assistance. And hopefully Ambassador Hale can talk a little bit about this. But so there is, just to conclude, there is reason for hope, I think, at a moment that is somehow unprecedented. But the government is really facing two really key challenges. One, the need to embark on reforms and economic and financial reforms that are painful, and at the same time, the need to strangle, for lack of a better word, any remaining Hezbollah sort of presence, military presence, and financing. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. Both you and Joseph gave us a lot to also move us forward. And I have a few follow-up questions, but I want to turn to Ambassador Hale to zoom into the US and international angle, particularly as this new Trump administration takes charge and seems to have focused its efforts so far on ensuring that the ceasefire is intact. And recently, there was also a waiver that was signed by the president to allow for aid to be funneled through for the Lebanese armed forces, which is another signal that this administration is very much supportive of Lebanon and understands that role. So how do you assess where we are today, Ambassador Hale, and how do you see the United States' role moving forward?
Well, thank you very much, Marissa, and thanks for having me. Listening to my distinguished colleagues, you can't help but draw the conclusion that, particularly in Lebanon, everything is linked, and that can make your head spin and paralyze actors who have a hard time, as one would expect, working through that. But to me, we have both the Lebanese and the Americans and all friends of Lebanon have an opportunity we never expected to have in terms of the absolute collapse of the Iranian strategy in the Middle East and the behavior of its proxies in places like Lebanon. So the question is, how do we consolidate that? And I'm struck by, I had always expected that when the Trump administration came into office, its regional strategy would the center point of it would be Iran. But that they would inevitably get drawn into crisis management because of the urgent and fragile situations in Gaza and southern Lebanon. And so that indeed is happening. And while they, of course, need to attend to these ceasefires and do our utmost to preserve them and build upon them, I haven't heard yet from the Trump administration a really compelling or coherent case about what their overall game is related to Iran. We hear bits and pieces of it. Some of it's contradictory. Carrots and sticks is a tried and true method, so maybe that's it. But they haven't really told us what it is. And unfortunately, or better or worse, today, diplomacy is pretty much played out in public. So maybe there's more going on than we know. Maybe there's more information being exchanged with key allies like the Saudis and the Israelis. But we don't know that. And I do get worried that the team is getting sucked into a short-term crisis management mode, and they have to, I think, work against that instinct. And of course, they have good people. They have Morgan Ortagus and Steve Witkoff, have Lebanon in focus. Lebanon's not being neglected in that sense. But I think the policy has to start with what we're going to do about Iran, and then it flows from there. And for the Lebanese, I think that in approaching the United States, there has to be, I think anyway, an appreciation that the Lebanese themselves now have to come up with some ideas and strategies on what they're going to do in this new environment, despite the difficulties we all know that exist in trying to find a cohesive set of policies in Lebanon, and make the case to us that we can be their partner, but they have the lead. And, the burden on the army is heavy. The ceasefire places upon the army's shoulders a lot of things that are going to be tough to do. Amos Hochstein, before he left office, said it would be years before the army would have the manpower in the South to do the job. So we have to be practical about that. But without security in the South, the Israelis are not going to pull out of Lebanon. And if they don't pull out of Lebanon, whatever talks are going on about the next phase really isn't going to work. And so that's got to be the key. So I do understand the need for that short-term focus. And it's one of the things I suspect the Israelis are looking for is a for real sense that Hezbollah is no longer able to operate in the South. And that means interdicting arms and setting up checkpoints and sweeping places that the army tends to ignore, like Iqlim Tufah and the area between Jazin and Nabatea, where anything goes, at least in the past. So there is bipartisan support for the army. I would encourage the new commander and even the president of Lebanon to think about coming to Washington as soon as possible. There's no substitute for the personal relations. President Aoun has a lot of credibility in Washington. There are voices that oppose it, and given the state of the debate and action related to assistance, no one should take it for granted. But so far, I think the case has been made successfully, and it will need to be made every week and every month about why our aid to the army is a cornerstone for that overall strategy, not just about Lebanon, but about Iran.
Thank you so much, David. And I want to zoom into one point that Ambassador Hale mentioned, Joseph, and go back to you, because in our travels to Lebanon and in a lot of the conversations we've had with all the political leaders, the one talking point that emerges is that the Lebanese have to own this process. And now that you've all mentioned on this panel that there is a unique opportunity with the decimation of Hezbollah, which has always been seen as an obstacle on many fronts. Do you think that there is the political will, not only at the government level, but the political leadership level of the various parties to actually own this process, both for the political restructuring, but more importantly, to also tackle some of the deep structural issues that are just sinking the economy further and further. And of course, in the post-war scenario, we have so many more challenges. Joseph, you are muted.
Yeah, I'm saying that your question touches upon a very complicated catch-22 that is really structural to Lebanon, in fact. It has to do with two things. First of all, the perception that lots of people, be them normal citizens or political forces, of the results of the war on Lebanon and what we are calling the decimation of Hezbollah. Here, I think there is a double risk. There's a risk by some forces to overread the defeat of Hezbollah. It has been defeated, but it has been defeated militarily against Israel. However, Hezbollah as a societal apparatus is still present. So overreading the results of the war is a risk. The other risk, and this is the first catch-22, is by Hezbollah under-reading or still remaining in a sort of denial regarding the magnitude of the defeat and the blow that it has taken. Probably they are still groggy, I would say, or in a state of semi-coma, which is normal. So they have hard time to figure out exactly where they are in the equation. notwithstanding, what you hear a lot about, which is probably true, the heated debate inside Hezbollah probably, and with Iran also, on the strategy and the course to follow and how to behave with regard to this new, let's say, equation and landscape, and Ambassador Hale has pointed to it. I mean, what will Iran do? And exactly to know that, we have to know what is America having in stock for Iran, and this is still unknown. This is the first catch-22. The second one is that, in Lebanon, and I think everyone knows it, Ambassador Hale probably also because he has lived it, in Lebanon, things cannot move easily if you don't have a minimal level of consensus. And this is where the trick is. How much consensus do you need? Meaning how much absorption of forces that were yesterday a source of deadlock, okay, Hezbollah to name it. How much do you have to absorb these forces in order to build consensus without absorbing too much consensus that would lead to paralysis and to business as usual, and to come back to the, kicking the many cans down the road? This is the second catch-22. And I think that in the beginning of the government, of the life of the government, this is something you could sense in the formation of the government, in the picking up of the ministers, in the drafting of the governmental declaration or statement, and now with the many choices. But there's one point in time where choices will have to be made, and we haven't reached that point yet. One of them is, for example, when will the president, because this will be the role of the president of the Republic for many reasons, when will the president have a frank, open, albeit discreet and maybe secret or behind-the-scene dialogue with Hezbollah about the way forward and the way to demobilize and to disband and to disarm? This has not started yet. Another very tricky debate will have to do with what happened today on the banking front, and Alia will talk about it. Also, at some point, you have to be clear with the Lebanese. I mean, there is a hard pill to swallow, okay, but what is the level of hardness of that pill, and how will you distribute the burden among the many stakeholders in order for that to be a fair process? This is also a second debate that has not been opened in Lebanon. The third one has to do with the expectations of the day-to-day expectations of rank and file citizens. The electricity, traffic jam, internet, water, everything that has been completely left over and left to be rotting for years today. These, we can call them low-hanging fruit, and we have probably an interest to tackle them very quickly. But even that will need a minimal a minimal amount of consensus, and we go back to this issue of consensus. And second, a minimal amount of financing. And as long as the international taps are closed, and they are closed for reasons that are tied to the bigger issue of the weapons and etc., you can't move an inch. All this with a huge constraint that we forget sometimes. This government has only almost 1 year still to live. There are legislative elections to come. So if certain results are not shown in the next 10 or 9 months, people will start to be really disenchanted. Probably this government will lose election. I don't know if Nawaf Salam will be able to come back, but the equation will change. Notwithstanding the equation that is changing in the region. We talked about Iran, we talked about something else also. We can talk about Syria. So we are really in a very, very fluctuating situation, and quick results on certain issues have to be at least shown very quickly in order to show that there's a direction and there's a will.
Thank you so much, Joseph. This is actually a perfect segue to move on to Alia and welcome her. Thank you so much for joining us, Alia. So given your expertise on the economy in particular, and you've just heard Joseph, outline some of the basic day-to-day challenges that the Lebanese have been dealing with for a number of years now, particularly since 2019. First of all, what is your current assessment of the economic situation? And the other thing I wanted to zoom into as well, which is what Joseph mentioned, the low-hanging fruit whether it's in the form of reforms that could be done quickly, particularly given this challenge of always reaching some sort of consensus, but also what else can this government do to ensure that there is some progress being made for the people to feel that they can move forward and trust this government and perhaps even elect it in the future.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you for the invitation, and apologies. I was late exactly for Lebanon, given the news about the appointment of the new governor, which whom we congratulate, of course. I mean, obviously, the economy situation is no doubt extremely challenging. I mean, just to give you a sense of the numbers, of course, over the last 5 to 6 years, the Lebanese economy have contracted by a cumulative of 38% in real terms. Even some of the recovery that we saw in 2023 was obviously reversed by the devastating war. And now the question is, how do you go back to recover growth without a banking system that is still in a zombie state, unable to provide credit to the private sector, and whom part of the shareholders of the banks are refusing any path towards a credible restructuring that was blocked, as we all know, over the past 5 years. So first, you have the challenge of growth and how to recover it in the absence of the financing channels of a banking system that is fully functioning and that is in the zombie state. The second, of course, is the fact that also related is this legacy of not dealing with the crisis and leaving the central bank in an insolvent situation with more than $70 billion of negative equity, which reflects on the fact that there is no prospects for any confidence in any exchange rate, increased dollarization of the economy, and therefore partly loss of room of maneuver in terms of policy levers for the government to impact the economy. And the third is the leg is the state, which is after defaulting on its debt, the last successive governments since 2020 have deliberately stopped or have been blocked to pursue or to put the country on the path towards an IMF program. And this, of course, this inability to move towards an IMF, leaving the no reform scenario, which we have always warned about, has led to an expansion of an already large informal sector, what now the Lebanese like to call the cash economy. And here, just a reminder that the World Bank has always said that the informal sector was employing 55% of the people, and at 2018 and by 2022, this informal economy has grown to 62% and probably now is much bigger. So the system, I would say, the political economy system, which led to the crisis and which also thwarted over the last 5 to 6 years any path towards resolution, is in our view, in our assessment as external observer and as somebody who works in the market, the main impediment and the main challenge that the new president and the new government is facing. Because an economy that has all these problems and that obviously now faces the large losses and destruction from reconstruction, which not only, as Patricia said, there's $6.8 billion of damaged physical asset, but also $7.2 billion in economic losses that require recovery and reconstruction needs of around $11 billion. This is clearly a much bigger task than 2006 war and damages to deal with, particularly because, as I explained, the state is bankrupt and the banking system is unable to allow capital flows, whether official or private, to flow in. So the approach to reconstruction now, today, is even more difficult. The only and the other big challenge that the president and the government faces is that state institutions are extremely weak, both in terms of their capacity to formulate policies, notably economic policies, but also implement them. And we have seen that over the last decade, actually. I myself was a civil servant, and I can testify of how state institutions' capacity has been weakened because also of the underfunding also, particularly over the last 5 years. The only silver lining, I would say, I don't want to sound very negative, is maybe the private sector, which has been able to keep the economy and some minimum level of employment going. But clearly, this engine of growth that has been pushed by the private sector has also benefited from the deleveraging that private corporates have benefited by closing their credits in real dollars with the dollars at the expense of depositors. So there has been also a transfer of wealth. So this is the economic situation. Now, how this political change in the political landscape could take us forward, giving all these challenges. To be honest, I think we have an opportunity, and I agree, like everybody, there is a bout of optimism, despite the fact that today there is a big debate in the country on the approach to nominating the governor, but also on the agenda moving forward to deal with the banking and crisis. I think what I see as important in the next phase is first, for the government to clearly delineate and devise the plan, both in terms of restructuring the financial sector, the public sector, the central bank, the fiscal reform agenda, the choice of monetary and exchange rate policy. Obviously, the country, to gain competitiveness, cannot continue to rely on a pegged exchange rate, but for that, it needs the capital inflows to be back. Without this restructuring, but not a restructuring that is not done technocratically, without any form of accountability and fairness in the distribution of the losses, because I believe this is what will bring back confidence into the system. And we strongly hope that we hear as soon as possible from the new governor whether the plan that is being said that he is endorsing to either push the burden of the losses on the state or to haircut depositors in such a abrupt manner is really what he wants to propose along with the government. And I think it is important to realize by linking it to the politics that any approach that puts the burden on the state is going to cripple the state's ability actually to even implement the political and security agenda that the international community is looking for. And this is, maybe I would add to my friend Joe, is the third catch-22 in the sense that, I mean, what comes first? Do you want to demobilize and demilitarize Hezbollah so that international partners, private investors start engaging with you to help you recover the economy? Or you want to restructure and deal with the vested interest in order to regain confidence both domestically and also internationally? Because it's very clear that these are the two challenges that both the president and the new government faces. There's no doubt that there is a willingness to reform, as Patricia said, both at the presidency and in the governor. Their ability to do so will largely depend on their courage to face obviously the pushback and the refusal of Hezbollah's disarmament, and second, the vested interests that for a long time have thwarted any re-engagement with private and international investors. So in terms of the quick wins, very, very quickly, to be honest, I think there are things on the fringe that can give an impetus to the economy. First is a very clear determination to anchor the country into an IMF program as soon as possible, but one IMF program that is based on a nationally owned strategy that the Lebanese have put forward and where consensus is being reached and not imposed for lack of getting to a consensus. That is certainly essential. And I don't think without this determination, you can make any other win, because you need the financing. Assuming that we are able to do that in the next few months, and what I mean, not only have a staff level agreement like in 2022, but rather go to the board by the end of this year, i.e. get to an agreement with the banking sector and the various stakeholders on the distribution of losses by, as I mentioned, have the right equilibrium between accountability and recovery, growth recovery on the other hand. And second, try to focus on key sectors that can push the private sector to gain competitiveness, and those are the electricity and the telecom sector. In my view, these are the largest, most important two obstacles where the international community, but also private investors are ready to engage, whether putting in place and using the PPP framework that has been long been stalled, or engaging with the World Bank and the IFC on those fronts. I think just to end here, I think there is no doubt that the country is in front of two scenarios. Either you are decisive in your choice to embrace concomitantly the need to reassure the international community that the security and 1701 implementation is done concomitantly with reforms, because one needs the other and one supports the other, and therefore you continue on the right path and gradually get onto the virtuous cycle, or you choose to and hopefully not to do what you have been doing for the last 5 years, i.e. lirify the deposits, try to find ways around capturing the economy by private vested interests even more, and the economy will continue to be in the informal sector, and potentially take Lebanon not only from the green list but also to the blacklist, and that is certainly prevent a reintegration of Lebanon into the international financial system. So I think it's on the Lebanese and on this leadership to decide, and I do believe that we have the elements to go in the right scenario, provided not only the willingness but the ability to implement reform is there.
Thank you so much, Adia. You gave us a lot of food for thought, and I want to turn to Patricia, but also reference why the tackling the economic situation, and particularly the day-to-day services, what people are feeling and sensing is so important. Like the latest Arab Barometer survey that was published in October of 2024 has, even in the midst of conflict in the region, and I assume that some of these interviews were conducted when tensions were rising between Israel and Hezbollah. Even in the midst of these security tensions, the economic situation and corruption were the first two items that were identified by the Lebanese people as the most challenging. And so, Patricia, how can, I mean, it's very difficult to predict, of course, or to project, but there is this window of opportunity that all of you have talked about. It's closing in very quickly because of the various challenges that you've outlined, particularly what Alia also described on the economic front. And what is the role of civil society, all these movements that we had seen that were on the streets in 2019? I mean, is there anything happening at the civil society level similar to sort of the informal economy that has grown that is also addressing some of these challenges?
Marissa, thank you. I want to just opine on this issue of political will before, and maybe I will respond in the process.
Sure, of course, go ahead.
But Because I mean, I just to put it in perspective, the last time such an opening was 20 years ago, like was after the Revolution. So I mean, there is kind of a moment here that really is unique. And the question is, I do think that what distinguishes it, I mean, because of its particularity and the way that we end up in this moment, that there is some amount of political will that didn't used to be there. And I do want to agree a bit with both Joe and Alia, that in order, I mean, of course, people need to own, I mean, Lebanese leaders need definitely to own this moment in order to send the right signals. But there need to be kind of actions. The quick win or quick result kind of avenue, I think, is really important, because as both Joe and Ali outlined, we have like a 10-month window, basically, or this government has a 10-month window. And if it fails, this could have tremendous impact, because again, there are parliamentary elections in 2022, and these elections really can be an opportunity to translate the changed balance of power that Joe talked about initially into parliament. So there needs to be some thinking about that. Based on what people have discussed already, I mean, some quick wins could be, for example, on the security and sovereignty front, bolder, this is something Ambassador Hale talked about, bolder LAF action. I mean, it might be happening, but it needs to be marketed a little bit better. I mean, there needs to be more visible LAF presence, more marketing of its checkpoints, and it's going into territory, and it's disarming Hezbollah in a real way. And some of that can really help build confidence, especially on the international arena. A timetable for the disarmament of Hezbollah is something some people have been calling for internally. I think that would signal, that would help translate the political will into concrete actions. And then other things like I mean, Alia mentioned a plan, I mean, an economic plan. I mean, we can't forget that the IMF negotiations took very long and led to very little. But I think the movement towards a plan, an economic plan, would really be an achievement. And and Alia, you are better placed for this than me for this, but some low-hanging fruits may have to do with tackling things like, I don't know, modernizing and digitizing some government functions, for example, to start to begin walking on the road to anti-corruption, etc., or some measure of administrative reforms. My understanding is that over half of director-level posts are vacant, and so trying to tackle that, and the public sector is bloated, so downsizing a bit the public sector. And of course, I think, Joe, you're the one who mentioned this. There is this issue of reforming the SMEs that are responsible for public services like electricity and water and transportation and telecommunication. Now, that may be a different animal, but some movement towards some action in this regard, I think, may help provide some confidence that this government is both on the security and the economic front, the reform front is serious, and that, the circumstances allow for this political will to translate into some actions despite the structural challenges that the country is afflicted with. So in terms of civil society, I mean, one issue that I don't know we haven't discussed is this issue of foreign funding, which I think is hitting hard civil society. And it's just this, the reduction of foreign assistance is not just a US side issue, it's also a European side issue. It's happening on all fronts. And I think this is impacting quite a bit civil society, though they remain active. And I think it will be important to ensure that civil society remains engaged in the work that needs to be done in advance of the parliamentary elections in May.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Ambassador Hill, I wanted to turn to you to, link up, and this is actually a really good segue with regards to the foreign funding issue of, the role of the United States. You've mentioned how important it is to continue to shore up, support for the Lebanese armed forces. But the United States is in a position currently with the Trump administration that wants other allies to also chip in. So do you see a role for the US to also maybe bring other key allies in the region to bring back some attention and support Lebanon, not only with the LAF, but also with the economy, with a lot of these civil society organizations that pretty much were dependent on US aid and other US assistance. And as the United States also sort of withdraws from leading a lot of these processes in the region, do you see a lot more regionalization of tending to the main challenges, particularly with regards to Lebanon?
Well, one of the points of philosophy, I think, for President Trump and some of his circle is that regional problems require regional approaches. In other words, that there should be a greater burden upon our partners in the regions to deal with the conflicts and difficulties that they're encountering. So I do think that there's a case to be made there, whether or not they've really focused on it, I don't know, of talking to the Saudis and others about their role. I've had many conversations in the past with the Saudis and the Emiratis about Lebanon. Now that Iran is down, but not out, I hope that they understand there's an opportunity for them to be there. We should be doubling down, the United States and our partners now more than ever, to show that there is, once an opportunity arises, there's going to be a response on our side, and that that Hezbollah does not have any longer a monopoly. Therefore, we need to be there and competing for the rebuilding of South Lebanon. But to be honest, as I listened to the discussion so far this morning, I'm reminded back to an article I wrote in January that I don't think you're really going to find that kind of substantial international support from governments or private sectors or NGOs unless there is a more solid, if not peace agreement, at least lasting sense of stability between Israel and Lebanon. I would argue that the best way I can think of to break through so many of these logjams that my colleagues have so rightly brought to the table is through a more substantial arrangement between Lebanon and Israel, even up to and including a peace agreement. Because if you have that kind of psychological breakthrough, then you can turn around and the Lebanese can make the case that Hezbollah has to be disarmed if we're going to live in peace, and there is no longer a justification for those who believe that there was one to legitimize the use of arms by a militia and terrorist group. That pretext is gone, and there will be overwhelming international concern, sympathy, and support for Lebanon that you will not see absent that kind of psychological breakthrough. You're going to get bogged down, unfortunately, otherwise in the IMF talks. That process is what it is. It doesn't work for a lot of countries that have complex political environments, and so there's a poor track record in sticking to them. And the donors in the Gulf have their own sets of requirements. So I honestly believe that's the way forward.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hill. Imad, I want to turn to you for an opportunity to ask our expert panelists a question before I get to the questions that we've received from the audience, and a reminder to our audience as well to submit their questions in the Q&A section of this webinar. So Imad, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Marissa. I appreciate it. I have a question for Ambassador Hale. It's a comment and a question, basically. You in your remarks, in your earlier remarks, you talked about the administration really looking at the Middle East from how it's going to be looking at the Iran, so to speak. I had a feeling that the administration has no intention whatsoever to really, harden its position towards Iran. I have a feeling that the administration, President Trump, is going to be listening to or is listening to what the Russian President Vladimir Putin prefers happens with Iran. Where do you stand on that? I mean, the president does not seem to want anything that would anger Russia these days, and Russia is on not bad terms with Iran. So, where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it's hard to say because we don't have enough of a picture. The administration's not really defined for us its overall Middle East strategy and how Iran, which I suspect should, anyway, I believe should be the centerpiece of that strategy, and I believe it frankly is. What we just don't know is actually what the intentions are. You may be right about Putin. I think the president is not doing anything that's terribly different than what most of his predecessors tried to do, which was establish a relationship with one of our major, major contenders and problems for the United States. What I would have hoped by now is that we would have learned that accommodating Putin isn't going to get you anything positive. But he's going through this process. That said, Donald Trump was almost assassinated by an Iranian agent in Palm Beach, Florida, last summer. And I don't believe people quickly forget things like that. And he's not a warmonger. Famously, Trump steps back from those who are oppressed for military action. That's why this activity against the Houthis was so notable, frankly. It was a recognition that American deterrence was on the line and had to be reestablished. So, but that also revealed a debate underway in our system about the trade-offs that are made when we do these things. So, I don't know. You could be right. I just don't think that, frankly, Trump's going to want to face the American people in a year's time or 2 years' time and try to explain how he handed over the Middle East back again to Iran and a Russian partner. I think that would be something he would not want to have to explain. So I'm not as concerned maybe as you are, but I think you raise a valid question.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hale. Ahmad, do you have any other questions for the other panelists before I turn to questions from our audience?
No, let's give the audience.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We have a number of questions. Yeah, Patricia, did you want to
just
comment?
In
Sure.
response to Ambassador Hale's previous, the Ambassador Hale sort of talked about the psychological breakthrough that needs to happen in order for things to evolve. In terms of Lebanon-Israeli peace agreement. I wanted just to suggest, because this is such a controversial issue, and I mean, we saw recently the comments that were made by the Prime Minister on this very issue, that there is one other element that could help restore some of this confidence, and it's in the border demarcation talks that began. I think the border delineation issue could be a significant development and could kind of help strengthen Lebanese sovereignty if these negotiations are successful. So I just want to throw it out there because we didn't touch upon it. I think this could be something, sort of an opportunity for Lebanon.
For Lebanon. Thank you so much. So we
Marisa, can I also add one thing on the regional dimension from the economy? I mean, I think it's very important to highlight that the regional actors, particularly the Gulf state, on which many of the Lebanese politicians are hoping that they would come to the economic rescue, are in a completely different mindset today. And we have seen that take this different shapes and forms, both particularly in Egypt, but also in Jordan, in Tunisia. I think the largesse of the Gulf states is not anymore there, or I would say is much more conditional. I mean, aid by the GCC countries is increasingly a geo-economic tool that is used to shape their foreign policy choices and to make them happen, not only in the region, but I think globally. But if there's one country where we can actually also see that the demands of the Gulf countries for reform implementation has been relatively high, notably the Saudis, is Egypt. We have seen the Saudis promise significant funding for Egypt, provided that Egypt delivers increasingly more on the IMF reforms, on private sector, on development. And the funding of Saudi has not yet come through because these reforms are being late. So I think it is extremely important for the new government, for the new president, to put ourselves in this new regional landscape and deal with our Gulf partners, but also the multilaterals from that perspective. There is less basically brotherly aid and more sort of debt to equity swap or aid for economic interests.
Thank you so much, Alia. This is a very important point, particularly as a lot of the GCC countries move forward with their own diversification plans and visions, right, for the future. So I'll turn to the questions from audience members. Joseph, I'll give this one to you from Jessica Stevens. What can we anticipate in terms of the new government's view of the UNIFIL mandate, which is subject to review/renewal in August?
Good question, but I don't think it's the government's view of the mandate of UNIFIL that is worrying me or any other person. I think it's the US posture towards that. I think that UNIFIL has lost a lot of, I would say it's, I wouldn't say credibility because it's not a matter of credibility, but of its worth in the eyes of this new American administration. And you can hear that. These are voices that are in there and you can hear them. The last renewal of the UNIFIL was really made by almost miracle, and it took a lot of French and other partners' pressure to do it. The many signals that are emanating from be it the new team of the new administration in the Middle East, meaning Mrs. Ortegas or Mr. Witkoff, or even the statements made by, the American general who's heading the surveillance, the ceasefire surveillance committee, all of them usher that UNIFIL's role is to be probably reformatted soon. Now, towards what, we don't know. A lot of partners also in Europe are finding that such a huge contingent of UNIFIL has become too big to sustain, too costly also. And I think that we have to expect that. So it's not mainly the Lebanese government that has a view. The Lebanese government will probably insist on keeping UNIFIL as it is, even also at the cost of widening its mandate, which is in fact in the letter and in the spirit of the ceasefire agreement. But I think that the battle will be with this new administration in Washington for both questions of pushing forward Lebanon to have direct talks with Israel, as Ambassador Hale was saying, and a way of doing that, of pressuring and leveraging towards that, is maybe to quote unquote threaten to decrease the number or to, let's say, deflate the number of UNIFIL contingent in the south. And also, I think that there's an international climate that also is probably starting to think about a new role, a new, let's say, way or methods to keep security in the south. With the deployment of the Lebanese army inflated, you know that the number is supposed to reach something like 12 to 15,000. And this is also in turn, as David Hale was saying, everything is interlinked in this country, which is linked to foreign funding also, because the army needs a strong support, not only in terms of money, but in terms of training, equipment, and etc. to fulfill its mission. So I think that this is the equation, the wider equation within which we have to read now the UNIFIL question. On that note, if you allow me,
Go ahead.
I heard David Hale, and I'm hearing also what's emanating from the US administration in terms of the necessity to move forward towards a sort of peace treaty or normalization with Israel and etc. I think that pushing this too far and too quickly could have a counter effect as long as the reconstruction process in the south has not taken off. You can't today, I mean, ignore the wounded community in southern Lebanon. I'm not talking about Hezbollah here. I'm talking about the sociology of the south. You know, houses are still on the ground, villages entirely are demolished. I'm not talking about Israel still keeping 5 points on the border. Some deaths have not been yet taken from under the rubble and etc. So pushing too far and too quickly on this question of normalization, I think is not a good messaging in terms of, let's say, the psychology of the people you are addressing. With that question. I think a good sequencing would be really to start talking seriously about the disarmament, the integration of Hezbollah in the state institution, the demobilization of Hezbollah. In parallel of that, reconstruction. And then after you can start talking about the diplomatic process with Israel. I think it's too soon. We have a bad example of that in '82 when a peace treaty was crafted while the Israeli army was still occupying Lebanon. And we know with what consequences we were faced after that in less than 2 years of time. So I think that cautiousness here is to be advised.
Thank you so much, Joseph. So the next question is on Syria. We touched upon it a little bit in the discussion. So I'll turn to you, Ambassador Hale, for the impact of the new leadership in Syria. We've seen, of course, as we've mentioned earlier, clashes on the border, HDS members who were killed as well, and taken into Lebanon and killed. So there's rising tensions. Joseph mentioned earlier that there are that nothing is, it's far from stable. How do you see the situation currently with regards to the new leadership in Syria and its impact on Lebanon?
Well, as with so many other topics we've discussed today, it's a remarkable and unexpected opportunity that no one seems to know how to handle. I'm struck, and you've heard me say this before, the good news is the Assad family's gone and they're gone for good. The bad news is that at least for the moment, they've been replaced by a Takfiri Salafi who spent much of his career organizing suicide bombs and governed Idlib in a way that is clear from the record. Now, he's trying to demonstrate that he's matured from that past. I think the jury's still out on whether that's the case. I think he's trying to be all things to all people, which he's succeeding to a large degree in doing. He's quite intelligent and I think dynamic, but a guy who's still got a militia that still believes in the jihadi approach to modern life is what it is. And so the test for him will be whether we all want success there. How can we work with him to move him to the moderate center so that he has an ability to actually control his country? And that is going to entail a moment of decision where he's going to have to confront these Takfiri militias and make a choice. So, we should be thinking about how to help him get to that point. We should be thinking about how you can condition sanctions that exist. Can you lift some and keep others in place? All of those questions are, I think, to be debated by the United States and our partners. But to me, that is the essential thing. And this can go 50-50 either way. It's certainly in all of our interests to try to move Syria, which right now I think is actually the cockpit to decide the real future for Lebanon and the neighboring areas, to get it in the right place. I don't want to prolong the discussion, but I would, if others have questions about it, be happy to go back and talk about some of the Israeli-Lebanese issues and my own perspective on them. But thank you, Marissa.
Thank you. And a question came in for Alia from Amal Karaki. What incentives, could be proposed for the banking sector to support and implement a reform of this sector? Also, there should be more emphasis on the social implications of the crisis and the need to address it.
Thank you, Marisa, and thank you, Amal, who's an old colleague, for the question. I think policies will have to be, the policy framework for the restructuring of the sector has to first follow international norms. If the objective is to restart and re-put the financial sector in Lebanon into a new model of governance that can instill confidence both of Lebanese and of the international investors, but also the Lebanese diaspora who lost a lot of deposits throughout the crisis. There has to be an overhaul. The banks shareholder have to lose their capital, but also be called upon to recapitalize and share a burden of the losses. And the onus now is on not only on the new governor, but also on the central bank as a whole. There will be a new team at the central bank that the government will need to appoint, but also there is a new banking control commission that will need to come also to continue the discussion and the negotiation for finalizing the burden sharing plan. I think moving forward with an independent resolution, bank resolution authority, so as to make sure that the restructuring of the banking system is independent from the interventions of politicians and politically appointed officials is key. And I think as we just read, I was just reading what Prime Minister Salam has said. They have passed not only the banking secrecy amendment to the banking secrecy law, which if true along the requirements of the IMF, that should provide a greater room for accountability and transparency to deal with the results of the crisis. But I think the other law that they have to pass in the next few weeks is the new bank resolution law, and having an independent authority would be important. The social implication of the banking crisis is a major issue, as I mentioned, the informal sector, the increase in poverty. That is also on the mind of the government. As we know, the Ministry of Social Affairs is trying to expand the social safety nets that have been put in place since 2020, expanded, better targeted. And after the war, last year, I mean, this year's the war and its implication, the social impact of the war will have to be tackled through improving the efficiency and the targeting of the safety net. So through this channel, I think we will have to continue to deal with the implication. But my final point is that, I mean, the only way in a country like Lebanon, where the private sector plays a very important role in growth, the key to lifting people out of poverty is not through handouts, particularly in a state that faces so many competing priorities for the public purse, whether it's the consolidating the LAF capacities, the security on the border, the infrastructure that is crumbling. And I think here comes again the importance that this government forges ahead with all the reforms to improve competition and the business environment, because only private sector growth can create jobs, including in the South. And I think I hope that the approach to reconstruction in the South is not confined only to reconstruction of roads and bridges, but an approach that embraces, as Patricia said, local economic communities. We need to think outside the box to wean off the populations of the enterprise of Hezbollah. We need to create jobs, private sector jobs, sustainable jobs, and that can be in different forms, including possibly not through loans, but maybe seeking guarantees for private sector investment in the area. But obviously that has to come, as I mentioned again, hand in hand with the strengthening of the LAF capacity to deploy and ensure security in the area.
Thank you, Alia. We have a question from Hussein Al-Najjar, and I'm going to give it to you, Patricia. To get Lebanon out of the political crisis, isn't it time to reform the constitution and adopt a new constitution that is equal for all and based on citizenship?
The fabulous question that I'm sure everybody can answer, but I will interpret this question as, is it time for a rehauling of the system, the political system on the basis of which Lebanon is formed or rests or functions, if you will. And I do think that in the absolute, there is a need to reform the system, but I do think that what needs to be done is there need to be efforts, I think, to change the political culture, to try to move the political culture away from vertical linkages, communitarian allegiances, to more horizontal linkages. And this is, in my opinion, trying to identify issues that are common to most of the communities in Lebanon and promote engagement around this issue to diminish the vertical allegiances that people have nurtured and feel, and that is enabled by the system. There is also the need, in terms of new constitution, equality for everyone. Movement towards this is judicial reform and an accountability agenda. And again, an accountability agenda is long overdue. There has not been any reckoning for sort of the abuses and the violations that happened throughout Lebanon's history, starting with the civil war to the slew of assassinations that took place during, the Iranian satrapy that Lebanon was living, and most prominent of which is the Beirut port blast. So, and there are indications right now that some of this accountability agenda may be put in place, given that for example, Judge Bitar is back to reopening the Beirut port blast investigation.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia.
Joe's issue.
Joe, would you want to comment or add anything
on this?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Very quickly on this question, this is an eternal recurrent question every time we have a webinar or a discussion on Lebanon, the need to change the system to go beyond the prevailing constitution. And I think it's a needed horizon. Two observations. First of all, it's probably the first time in recent history that we have a prime minister that wrote a series of texts on this issue. So we have something to base ourselves on. He has a book that was published 2-3 years ago, a collection of articles where he plainly says and explains how to get beyond, let's say, the traditional Lebanese political system in gradation, incrementally, etc., with a lot of very interesting proposals. I think that it's interesting that we have a person like that now in power. The question is time. Again, he is still there for a year. Maybe he will come back after a year, but he is there for a year. So he has a vision, but he doesn't have probably the time. 2.2, observation 2, already what he said and what the president said in his statement, in his inaugural statement, is that already in the Taif agreement, you have provisions that are enough, I wouldn't say audacious, but that open enough space for the system to move or to leap over by itself. I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. Article 95 of the Constitution that talks about, for example, the incremental way to go beyond the sectarian system. You have articles on the creation of a Senate. You have articles on decentralization, a very wide decentralization. You have articles on many other issues having to do with the personal status that you can implement. So already, if this government and this president of the Republic are up to their words in their speeches and in their postures and implement what hasn't been implemented in the Taif agreement, already it's an enormous progress. And then you have a second step, which is the longer term horizon that people in government also are known to bear and to fight for now a while. So the problem is not there. The problem is to have the time to do it, to have the political means to do it, and to build the enough and the solid enough alliances to do it. What happened today, again, I don't want to overstate it, what happened today in the Council of Ministers is not a good indicator of that. I think that the cohesion inside the government today has been scorched, and this doesn't bode very well for the reforms to come. I think that now we have a trench within the government, inside the executive branch, and I think that this will leave traces for the months to come, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm going to go back to one more question at the top. It's a very somewhat long from Paula Maawad. The careful optimism and trust are fading quick and becoming another phase of stuckedness in Lebanese politics. The government has not been transparent regarding the next steps to hold politicians accountable for the Beirut blast, port blast, and other corrupt files, as well as bringing bankers to face justice due to the economic collapse and money transfers. Borders remain undefined. The LAF are not fully engaged yet. Political decision, in between parentheses. It is time to set some examples by bringing politicians to face justice and Hezbollah members without a fear of a clash. The goal remains, the government of Lebanon remains hesitant and scared. What is the input of the panel regarding an international initiative bringing the government of Lebanon and all actors to revise the constitution? We've already talked about that a little bit. Redraft the Ta'if localism, the Ta'if agreement, and probably sponsor some sort of hybrid devolution localism new system, since the system has been stuck for some time. Who would like to tackle this? Joseph, would you like to go ahead?
I think we just answered it. I mean, I think I myself,
Yeah.
I brought my part of the answer. Now, of course, on the question of the justice reform and etc., it's also included in the governmental declaration. I know for a fact that the Minister of Justice has finalized a draft on that. But again, and Patricia said something important, the texts are not only the ones that need to be transformed and reformed. You know, you have the behavior, you have the political culture. You can have the best texts you want, but if magistrates and judges and etc. are not recruited in the proper way or don't have the proper mindset, you are still stuck with the same thing. And the port explosion is one example. But I think that, again, here again, we can say the same. We have a relative opening today. We have to make the best use of it. Time is not unlimited. The signs that have already appeared today are worrying. We have to be quick, cautious, realistic, but ambitious at the same time. It's very difficult, but this has been the fate of this country for a very long time now.
Thank you, Joseph. And David, this question mentioned, is there room for some sort of international initiative? Do you see the United States leading such an initiative, or do you think this is something that the GCC countries alongside with other countries can do, or maybe the French or not?
I don't see an American initiative. I don't think America would take a leadership role. I don't think that we would be an obstacle either. I think that the history of Ta'if shows that basically it was a Syrian-Saudi deal. And again, I come back to this, the major thing that's changed after the collapse of Hezbollah is the transformation of Syria. And I'm not hearing people yet sort of coming to grips with that new reality. And this comes back to the point, which is time's running out. You don't make peace with your enemies, with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And I understand the psychological situation is what it is, nor do I expect that there would be any possibility of a negotiation on future phases until the ceasefire itself is reestablished and Israel is no longer in these 5 places or feels compelled for security reasons to be there. but if not now, when? And it was Assad who killed the 82 deal. It was Schultz who misread the cards and thought that the Syrians could be cajoled by the Saudis into accepting that peace treaty, and he didn't understand the region well enough to understand that that wasn't going to happen, and that the Syrians had every chance with their allies in Lebanon, including the then emerging Hezbollah, to defeat it, and that's exactly what they did. They don't have that ability now. So it's now about Lebanese decisions. And I understand the diplomatic formula. It's tried and true of trying to start to break down the issues that seem to be the problem. The territorial border delineation stuff isn't going to move anyone if it's not in the context of an actual peace agreement. Neither side is going to give up these claims unless they see what they're going to get in return. And it's not territory, it's the benefits of peace and security. So I think starting with the border delineation is to ensure failure. Now, if you're going to have a peace agreement, there has to be some handling of those issues to be put on perhaps in another format, another context, so it doesn't become the obstacle. Because I don't believe that has anything to do with the real source of the conflict over the years. They've been used as pretexts to justify armed resistance by Hezbollah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. We have a few minutes left, and I thought we could maybe do a very quick round for any final thoughts, 30, 40-second thoughts that you want to sort of end with. So I'll start with you, Alia, and then we'll move with the rest of the panel.
Sure. As I said, I think I repeat myself by saying that the delivering on the security agenda, which is essential to reduce economic risks for Lebanon, will require a forging ahead with steadfastly on the economic reforms, starting by the restructuring of the financial sector and the public sector. Without that, there cannot be an engagement with the international community, and the international community wants to see that happening, and the leadership both at the presidency and the prime ministry level to overcome the obstacles put forward both by the vested interest as well as by non-state actors.
Thank you. Patricia?
I think, Joe said it well last time, this idea that we're at a moment and Lebanon is sort of offered a chance at, or an opportunity at sort of independence and reconciliation through this fresh leadership that is well-intentioned, but facing tremendous sort of challenges. I think we come out of this with the sense that really Lebanon needs quick results. Most importantly on sovereignty, on reform, on reconstruction, in order to kind of instill confidence and get things moving. And again, this idea that the government needs to engage in low-hanging fruits is important, and underscoring that it's very easy to squander this opportunity.
Thank you. Joseph?
Yes, I would maybe put it this way. What happened so far was really unexpected, and it happened really like a sort of, I don't know, I would say miracle, quote unquote, and we really have a new opportunity. However, it came with a huge cost. It came with a huge cost in terms of destruction and in terms of fissure. We have a fissure in the country. We have to recognize it. There's a part of the country that is feeling wounded, maybe humiliated and defeated. There's a part that is feeling over-triumphant. I think that one of the most difficult tasks of this government and this new president is to heal the wounds and really show everyone that as of now, the only tent that could protect everyone is a functional, respectable, and inclusive state. Without that, I think that history will repeat itself.
Thank you, Joseph. And the last word to you, David.
Well, I think I already said my piece, so I won't belabor it. But I do think there's an enormous reservoir of goodwill and a desire for success for Lebanon, certainly in my country, and I feel that's the case in many other places. But for the first time in decades, Lebanon and the Lebanese decision makers, and with all the complexities that they encountered because of the richness and diversity of the country, are going to have to come up with ideas that we can say, that's a good strategy. We want to be a partner of that, rather than always expecting the outside players to bring their ideas. So we all wish Lebanon well, and this has been a very rich discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hale. Thanks to all of you for tuning in today. I want to thank our expert panelists. This was a really rich discussion, and apologies for not going through all the questions, but we appreciate all your questions and comments. Many thanks to Imad Harb and to Lana Qattan from the Arab Center. It was a great collaboration, and we hope to continue the discussion on Lebanon. Thank you very much.